Like when you do all this, and I don't have the whole picture in my head because no one does, because this data is not available because half of it's going through shadow banks and half of it's going, like it's miserable. But we have motive, we have means, we have opportunity, we have attitude, we have all these things. All the bad guys point to, all the data points point that the bad guys here, the main beneficiaries of the yen carry trade is Europe. And
Yep.
so they're the ones you have to be watching. It's not the Chinese. They got a closed capital account. It's not the Russians. They don't have any capital. It's got to be the Europeans, right? I mean, here's one for you. Everybody talks about how many treasuries the Japanese have. Does anybody talk about how many the Bank of England has?
I was going to ask. No.
Bank of England, over 950 billion. It's doubled in the last 2 years.
The best stuff happens always. That's why I immediately hit record is offline, right? So that's why I want to get into it. As I just said, your Twitter feed's on fire. And I think I was like trying myself to process all this, and I want to set it up for you, is like
Sure.
I think you do a really good job, a great job. In fact, almost like no other, the big picture. And I think I have to look at it. I have to look at it like that, seeing what the administration's doing. Agree or disagree, but just see what they're doing, and that it all kind of goes together. I don't want to say kind of, it does go together. It goes really well together.
Yeah.
Agree or disagree, and I do disagree with some of the policy, or for example, we can
course.
take Iran. Like, I'm not a war guy, right? But
Yeah, none of us are.
but let's not look at it like that. Let's look at it like, again, America first, right? And then you get it. So, and all of that, Tom, what the hell is going on? But let's
Well,
start with we just had all these Europe's falling. You had Morocco
yeah.
invading Spain now, it seems like.
So,
We can,
so I
and it all
guess,
ties together, but I want
I
your
guess,
words.
I guess this morning, I think what you're talking about, if I'm putting down, if I'm catching what you're putting down, right? So this morning, we're talking, or everybody's talking about the unwind of the yen carry trade, and Bessent coming in, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent coming in and making it abundantly clear to everybody that he's willing to defend the yen and defend Japan, um, as one of our main partners. And I think this is pretty
Right.
clear. This goes, and this is downstream of what we saw earlier in the year with Argentina, right?
Yep.
Where he gave them a $40 billion swap line, and then he had to
Right.
go out there and do basic financial education to the media, who was like, "Well, why did you bail out Argentina?" We're like, "Oh, he's like, I didn't bail out Argentina. Do you understand what a swap line is?" And and in this very Scott Bessent kind of condescending way, then explained to them it wasn't a bailout. It was a swap line. A swap line is like, we're going to sell you dollars, and we're going to charge you interest on those dollars,
Think about
and we're
that.
going to make some money on those dollars, but we're going to get Argentina through a difficult short-term period of time, which was the attack that was happening on the Argentinian peso in the run-up to the Argentinian elections, to shore up Javier Milei's government and make sure that they won.
Yep.
Because financial moves like this, they're not separate from geopolitics,
Yep.
right? At all. They're not separate.
It's
People
very
want,
key. It's very
right, and
key.
people want us to believe that they are, because then they get to decide how to figure out how to frame their narrative. And their
Right.
narrative, of course, is that, oh no, the financial markets have nothing to do with geopolitics, and until, of course, they want to
They
make
do.
it, until they want to frame the geopolitical argument around what's happening. So once you understand that, then it shouldn't be that hard that you have the Trump administration is doing their geopolitical maneuvers and they're using the Treasury Department. Everybody else is using their central bank. It's like, I listen to these people talk, like the Europeans, like, the British, like, because I don't consider them the same people. Um, or the Iranians or the Russians or the Chinese or anybody else, they use their monetary policy for geopolitical purposes. What? We're not allowed to? Why? Because we're the big bad American hegemon and we don't deserve that, and we're the evil Anglo-Zionists or whatever narrative is spinning through your head on a daily basis. That's fine.
Right.
You can have that opinion. I'm okay with that. But we get to do that as well. If they get to
Right.
do it, we get to do it. And here's the thing that really bothers a lot of people because they want America. What they are doing is they're tipping their hand, that they actually want America to fail.
Mhm.
Okay. Now you can
For an
argue that,
ideal too,
well,
idealistically speaking, right?
there is some idealism in there as well. There is some, that, especially libertarians, right? And
Hmm.
Austro libertarians, they
That's
have
what
a
I'm getting at. That's what
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
getting at. Yeah.
I understand that, but I'm just like I'm going to I want to like keep it at the international relations level first, because as far as I'm concerned, the libertarians are the useful idiots in this scenario for the big geopolitical power politics that are happening.
Yeah.
Okay, so everybody's trying to figure out why would Bessent why would he let his cocktail napkin notes be photographed by Reuters and put out that he needs to buy yen? Like, okay, like that's like John Bolton out there with the legal pad, when they went to Vietnam a few years ago during Trump's first administration, same thing.
Right.
And
Yep.
then and so I started just to explain the basic stuff of how and why this would work. And some guy said, "Well, this 11D chess stuff is getting tiresome." And I think this is what you were talking about earlier about my Twitter feed. And I'm like, "Well, what's so complicated about it? Trump, I want to screw Europe. They've been screwing us here. Yeah, Scott, you're the money guy. What do you
Yep.
got?"
That's it. Yep.
Well, yeah, actually, yes, Mr. President. You see, Japan, I like the Japanese. They're good people. They had leadership until recently.
Hmm.
Yes, sir, I agree. They've been Europe's pawns for a long time now, and manipulating the yen to rig the dollar rates in their favor. Trump is like, "Ooh, I get it." Well, if we just support them when they try to get out of their debt trap, then we both win. So, in short, to rebuild America, we have to rebuild Japan's financial obligations. What, again? Oh, okay. Can you make that happen? Yes, sir. How
Yep.
are you so sure? Because I'm the guy who helped destroy the UK and gift wrap them for the EU 30 years ago. All I have to do is engineer the exact opposite trade. You see, Marco, that's why I like this guy. This isn't, I mean, it's a funny story or, scene, right? Little bit of,
But I see it also, it's a metaphor, but it's also true, right?
it's probably exactly what happened.
Yeah.
I don't know this, but like Trump, like let's back up for a second. There's a narrative out there. That
Right.
narrative is that Donald Trump is old and senile and a madman and has no idea what he's doing.
Right.
Now, that's nonsense. Donald Trump has spent more years of his life trying to figure out how to get the best cost of capital he can to build very large buildings.
Hmm.
If anybody, Donald Trump has forgotten more about how to make a real estate deal and how to manipulate interest rates and get the best cost of capital for a deal as possible than you and I will ever learn in our entire lives.
Right.
I think that's fair. And so
Right.
the idea that Trump is an idiot and is impulsive, is a
Well, that's
madman,
foolish.
it's just foolish.
Yeah, it's
It, I,
foolish.
I agree. It's foolish. So let's say, let's just get out of the cartoon land. Let's get into reality and let's say, look, Donald Trump has agency. He knows what he wants to accomplish. He's got people around him who have experience that also want to accomplish the same things he does. Scott Bessent has been very clear that we're going to use Treasury and monetary policy in order to get these things done. So now, here we are, less than 3 months away from the midterm elections, which are existential, not just for the United States, but for the United States' adversaries and enemies. And you can
Hmm.
define those adversaries and enemies however you want. I happen to define our enemies as the Europeans. Other people say it's the Chinese. Other people say it's the Russians. Other people say it's the Israelis. I don't care. It does not matter. I have my perspective on it. You're allowed to have whatever perspective you want. Okay.
Hmm.
But I'm going to give you my perspective on it, which I think it's the old European colonial powers because I look at who they are. Like the Chinese aren't hard. They're managers, and they're very good managerial people, and they have a and they've decided to use some form of communism and third way capitalism, communism, corporatism to get their thing done. The Russians are still just Russians. You know, they are, and they're Slavs, and they have a particular mindset, and they are who they are. But the Europeans, which we know well because we're Americans, and we know our European brethren very well because we're the Europeans who left to go conquer a continent and get away from the old feudal powers of Europe. They have a feudal attitude towards their people, meaning they are allowed to only get as much capital out of their land as possible, and then everything else goes to their overlords. And they have a rentier's attitude or colonialist attitude towards everyone else, meaning they got to bring all the rent back and do nothing in return. So if you think about it from that perspective, and you think about who they are, what their mindset is, you come to this conclusion that, oh, that's what the yen carry trade is. That's what their absolute desire to control our monetary system and use the dollar and use, because let's back up for a second. Let's think about
Please,
this.
and this is key. Go ahead.
Right.
Go ahead.
Okay. So this morning I was chatting with Dexter White about this, and he and I were chatting about it. And he said, here's a fact that people need to wrap their heads around. They have talked to me about the great industries of Europe. Talk to me about how much growth they have. They have collectively the same amount of GDP, relatively speaking, as we do, except they have more people, a lot more people, and they don't innovate. So it's clearly still the old feudal system of Europe.
That's exactly it.
Right. Yep. As opposed to the United States that creates unbelievable amounts of capital with fewer people and and not necessarily fewer resources. The Japanese are just as industrious, if not more so, on a per capita basis. Right. So, and again, you can use GDP, real GDP, whatever you want. I don't care. Pick the statistics, but these numbers are stark, right? Mm-hmm. The big one. Well, how about this one? Right, that roughly 30 years ago, roughly we had the same proportion of global GDP between Europe and the United States. Today, that number is not even close. Europe has fallen dramatically versus the United States and China. So how is there any money? So whatever money is flowing into Europe, is it being used to create industrial capacity, to then create growth, to create advancement? So here's another one. Here's another fact for you. The European Union makes more money taxing American companies than they do than they produce profits off of their industries.
Think about that.
So that's a perfect example of exactly what I'm talking about. And so now recycle those tax dollars into, the $4 trillion worth of your U.S. Treasuries that they have on their central bank balance sheets as reserves that they then pull a vig off of and then use that to lever up through the City of London and other places that are unregulated in order to then create, these liquidity, these pools of hot money and this global pool of liquidity to then invest in carry trades here and carry trades and all this stuff. And all they're doing is sucking capital out of the global economy onto their balance sheets while everybody else has to work that much harder. It's part and parcel to the way they treat their own people. So why wouldn't they treat the rest of the world the exact same way?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. Exactly.
So now let's talk about the yen carry trade and the end of it and why, this idea of what I laid out this morning and why would Bessent, want to help the Japanese? Well, this isn't particularly hard, right? Because the key is the following. He sold euros to buy yen.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep.
And he did so after the euro hit a high last week after the central bank meetings from the Bank of Japan and the Federal Reserve. The euro, when Kevin Warsh didn't raise interest rates, the euro went wee and the dollar went down. And of course, because previous to the meeting, everybody was hoarding dollars because they were expecting Warsh to raise. Too many people were expecting Warsh to raise. It was a bad bet in my mind. I never expected Warsh to raise, so I'm not surprised to watch the long dollar trade unwind when it was clear that Warsh wasn't going to raise interest rates. As a matter of fact, I still think Warsh wants to cut interest rates.
Yeah, I
So
think
now
so
on
too.
the other side, of that, and I was honestly surprised that Ueda at the Bank of Japan did not raise on Thursday night. But time moves quickly. I say that, and like they just raised in June, so really asking them to raise in July at the next meeting, knowing the Japanese, this was an unreasonable. Yeah, in hindsight,
Right.
that's an unreasonable call on my part. Fine,
Sure.
but September is definitely on the table, and if you look at the rate at which they've been raising interest rates, it's been accelerating. Like 6 months or a year from them ending yield curve control to another year before they go to 0.25, and then it's 8 months until they go to 0.5, and then it's 4 months until they go to 0.75, and then it's another 3 months until they go to 1%. So maybe that's so there's a kind of acceleration effect happening here with the Bank of Japan. So that makes sense because they need to do something about this. They need to entice Mrs. Watanabe to keep her money in Japan, and they get the Japanese corporates to unwind their higher yielding investments overseas, where they've taken their profits and invested them in U.S. Treasuries or I don't know, Italian
Stock,
debt
whatever,
or whatever,
yeah.
stocks, this, that, all this stuff, right? The AI trade. You can come up with 100 different places to put your money that's better than a Japanese 5-year or 2-year. Now the long end of the Japanese yield curve is becoming interesting with the 15-year trading above 4%, with the 10-year trading at nearly 3%, right? Yeah, but no, there's a kink in the Japanese yield curve at 15 years that I uncovered on Sunday, and I was like, wow. I was talking to my patrons on Sunday about this, and I'm like, where did that come from? The rest of the Japanese yield curve looks normal, but someone has been aggressively selling the Japanese 15-year for a while now. Now, is that a particularly thick market? Meaning, is it a particularly deep market? No. How many Japanese 15 years could be out there? But somebody could spend very little money to move that rate, and then it's kind of like watching people bet on weird stuff on Polymarket and going, see, the Republicans are going to lose the midterms because some guy like dumped $5 million on a Senate race in in Kentucky. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just dumb. So
Yeah.
like, I'm supposed to take this at face value. Like, this is not some guy out there running a boiler room operation on Kalshi. Really? Okay.
Well, I laugh because my son and I will watch the poly markets with this kind of stuff, and these are the shenanigans that you see. But anyways, go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right. As far as I'm concerned, I've been saying it for a while now. I think Polymarket is just a new polling. Everybody knows the polls are nonsense. And I got into it with Rudy Havenstein the other day about, he posted some poll about, Trump losing the midterms, and I'm like, some Quinnipiac poll, and he's like, I'm sure that I don't know, the Shah had better numbers in 1953, and I'm like, I'm sure I'm sure Quinnipiac, does still only polls Democrats, like so, because I know people who used to work there, and they're like, yeah, we used to just I could watch my coworkers throwing Republican responses in the toilet and then reporting the numbers, like Quinnipiac is as dirty as the day is long, and when it comes to this,
People still don't get all that. I mean,
Right.
that's just beyond me. But anyways, go ahead.
So I know, because we're kind of off target here, but it is kind of important. So what you should we should look at is the yen carry trade. The current financial system as we exist within it today is built off of the yen carry trades, built off of that massive industrial base that was built in Japan and then levered up into the future. But the Japanese can't run that anymore. Everybody knows it. The math doesn't support it. So what do they got to do? Now, there's two things I want to remind everybody about before we go any further. One is that whenever people are wanting to gaslight you, they only talk about the debt. They never talk about the assets.
Yeah.
Never. I've been screaming about this for years on every podcast that I go on, and we start talking about the U.S. debt. I'm like, really? Have you looked at the amount of assets on the U.S.'s balance sheet as a country? Well, by the way, Japan has a lot of assets.
Yep.
They've got a lot of really good assets. And the Europeans don't. China does. The Russians are trying to build some, but they're being attacked by the Europeans and sometimes the Americans and sometimes the Chinese and everybody else to try and keep them from growing. And that's what Russia-Ukraine is. It's just a big suck on potential Russian investment capital in their own country. That's all. That's the way you have to look at Ukraine. It's literally just a big, source of friction, that the Russian economy has to overcome. It's just a big static coefficient of friction, if you want to put it in physics terms, right?
Right.
So whenever this starts, so now here's the fun part. So we have a variety of moving parts here. And I'm going to try and just focus on the Federal Reserve because everything else is part of the process. Because here's the big one, right? Again, like I said, Donald Trump is an idiot. This is the common parlance today. Donald Trump's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's trapped in Iran. He's nothing going on. Meanwhile, the guy shoots a 70 over the weekend. And you're not shooting a 70 when you're playing 18 holes of golf at 80 years old. And you believe you have any stress in your life. Like, really?
Right.
Okay. But regardless of that, again, salt at the taste. That's my interpretation of it. He doesn't act like a guy who's got a lot of stress on his head. He's like, he's on the ninth tee. I could even see him on the ninth tee on Saturday afternoon going, we're going to bomb Iran back to the Stone Age. Oh, yeah, that was a good putt. I left it a little short,
right.
and then he goes right back to tweets, put this out on Truth Social. And then he goes and takes his 10th, takes his drive on the 10th tee. Who's up here? Whose turn is it? Let's go. Right. This is Trump. Because he's Donald Trump. So the idea that Donald Trump doesn't understand bond markets, doesn't understand currency markets. Please, man's built buildings all over the world. If you don't know how to manage your FX risk, you don't know how to build buildings around the world. Okay? Doesn't understand the geopolitics of the situation and has a Treasury secretary who literally was the guy who, along with Stan Druckenmiller, who blew up the Bank of England back in the early 90s, which then led to the destruction of the Thatcher government, which then led to the collapse of the ERM, which then led to them becoming part of the European Union under John Major, right? Okay, now, you don't think that guy has some skills, really?
Right.
Okay. You really think that Druckenmiller and Bessent and these guys don't have any skills? Okay.
Right.
You think they're all morons. You think you know more about them because you're some rando on Twitter. Or hell, you're even nominally a financial analyst like me who's supposed to know all this stuff and have opinions and be an expert. I don't even know the structure of these trades. I wouldn't even begin to guess. But I know they do.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's the thing. Why would he let it be known that he was buying yen and then we see it occurring through the Federal Reserve Bank of New York that we sold euros to buy yen? That was your key. That was your tell. And now that's telling you who they've identified as the problem. So the euro-yen cross is really the whole shebang, right? Yeah. And every time that there's a sovereign debt crisis in Europe, I remember going back to Zero Hedge in 2015 and 2011 and other times, they would be screaming about the euro-yen cross. When German debt was blowing up or when Italian debt was blowing up or Greek debt was blowing up. Remember all these things? Zero Hedge used to talk about the euro-yen cross all the time.
Right.
I wonder why. Well, because it was important. Because the carry trades were being unwound.
Mm-hmm.
So Donald Trump is an idiot. He is trapped. We've got $40 trillion worth of debt. He's trapped in a war he can't win. Iran is going to bleed him out, blah, 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 blah. Therefore, the new guy at the Fed who wants to change the way we do monetary policy is trapped and he's along for the ride. That is the current narrative that's out there.
Yeah, no, totally. That's what
right? Am I missing something?
No, that's it.
Okay.
You got it.
So now, if that's the case, then if that's true, then why is Scott Bessent running the euro yen? Is selling euros and buying yen? Why isn't he selling dollars to buy yen?
Right.
Mm,
because
maybe he's doing that too.
maybe he's doing that too.
Or
But
maybe he wants to force the euro down, which
yeah,
would then unwind carry trades even more because
yep.
the carry trades are all about, positive cost of carry. So I got something for you. So this morning I got a thing from a friend of mine, couple of notes, and we were talking about this morning, and there was an article that a friend of mine sent me, and I didn't read the whole thing because it was behind the Substack paywall, but like the little free blurb ended with, "Oh, and the Europeans have been running a short yen, short U.S. Treasury trade at a positive carry this entire time," and I'm like,
Hmm.
uh-huh. And then I sat down for a couple of hours and like worked out what to understand what was happening. And I watch bond spreads. I
Right.
watch the U.S.
Yep.
German spread, the French Italian spread, the Italian German spread, the U.S. UK spread, generally in the 10-year market because that's the most liquid. I could look at the twos as well, but I use the tens because it's everybody's benchmark rate, right?
Hmm.
So I finally went ahead and did the same thing and looked at the Japanese 10-year and I looked at the cost of carry. And I went, oh, well, isn't it interesting that when you take the German US spread, which is positive 1.5 for Germany, and you take the American Japanese spread at the 10-year level, and it's 1.8%, the Germans, this guy is correct. There's a 30 basis point positive cost of carry if you're just, moving bunds versus U.S. Treasuries versus Japanese versus JGBs, there's 30 basis points in there to play with. And oh, by the way, if the euro moves too far or the yen moves too far or the dollar moves too far, guess what? That blows up.
Yeah.
But if the ECB and the BOE and the Bank of England and its many subsidiaries in BVI, the Bahamas, the Caymans,
Yep.
Canada, blah, 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 all the way across the board, and everybody, and the Swiss National Bank for the Bundesbank in Japan and Germany, I mean, which is the wholly owned subsidiary effectively of the Bundesbank in Germany. Like when you do all this, and I don't have the whole picture in my head because no one does, because this data is not available because half of it's going through shadow banks and half of it's going, like it's miserable. But we have motive, we have means, we have opportunity, we have attitude, we have all these things. All the bad guys point to, all the data points point that the bad guys here, the main beneficiaries of the yen carry trade is Europe. And
Yep.
so they're the ones you have to be watching. It's not the Chinese. They got a closed capital account. It's not the Russians. They don't have any capital. It's got to be the Europeans, right? I mean, here's one for you. Everybody talks about how many treasuries the Japanese have. Does anybody talk about how many the Bank of England has?
I was going to ask. No.
Bank of England over 950 billion. It's doubled in the last 2 years.
Think about that.
Add in the Caymans, $400 billion. Add in Euroclear, Belgium, and Luxembourg. There's another $700 billion.
There you go.
Ireland, $400 billion. Canada, $350 billion.
Right.
Okay, the Bahamas, the Bermuda, $85 billion. BVI, the British Virgin Islands, another $100 billion. I've looked at the tick reports going back for the last 13 years, and I can tell you there's more hinky shit in the British Virgin Islands data than any other one on the planet. I
Mhm.
wonder why. Okay,
Mhm.
so again, if you are Scott Bessent, right, and the Europeans coming into this Fed meeting for the FOMC meeting, which they want to, I'm going to lay out a thesis for you. You can salt it to taste. It's my thesis. I'm conspiratorially minded. I'll put that on the table for free, right? Okay. Got to get nicotine up for this one. So, if you're the bad guys and your goal, and we know that the Europeans have deep, deep ties inside our government at every level, as much, if not more so, than APAC or the Israelis or anybody else. We have old relationships all through our business, all through our institutions with MI6, with French intelligence, with the French, with the British, everybody. Like our entire existence as a country has been tied to our deep economic relationship with Europe.
Mhm.
Sometimes adversarial, sometimes not, sometimes this, sometimes that. Okay. So now you can't ignore it. It's staring you in the face. So if they don't want Trump, Bessent, and Warsh to fundamentally alter the way the United States does business away from the old orthodoxy, then, and you've got a new Fed chairman that you're trying to embarrass, what would you do? Would you run a yen short, long end of the yield curve, U.S. Treasury short trade?
No.
Yes, you would. Going
You
into the
wouldn't.
Fed meeting, of course you would. You want to raise rates.
Right, right,
You
right,
want
right,
to
right,
you
right,
want to
right.
blow up the yen. You want to raise rates.
Yep,
You
right,
want
right.
to force. You want to try and blackmail the Fed chairman
I misunderstood
into.
you. Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Right.
I figured it again,
Yeah,
folks. This stuff's
no,
not easy.
that's exactly right.
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 So
Right.
you would want to do that. If I were Christine Lagarde and
Yep.
and I wore a neck scarf, that's what I would do. If I was Andrew Bailey over at the Bank of England, that's what I would do. If I was Mark Carney, who's effectively running the Bank of Canada, that's what I would be doing.
Right.
If you're in that mindset, right, then this is what you would do. And you would put your thumb on the scale of the market to get everybody to believe that the Fed's going to raise interest rates because the market's telling the Fed to raise interest rates. Right? So
Right.
those 5 people left in the world who believe we have free markets, which we don't. We have central
Mhm.
bank dominated markets still.
Right.
Go out there on Twitter and ignore all the geopolitics,
Totally.
all of the history, everything else to just bomb everybody's feed. And then all of a sudden, about 2.5, 3 weeks ago, I watched every yen carry trade bear on the planet come back out and blow up my Twitter feed left and right. All sorts of newly minted experts about Japan showing up on Twitter. Everybody's seen them. Oh, guys who have been in and out of the business for years. They show up at opportune times and they run an angry dollar bear scenario. And then they draft the gold guys, they draft the gold and the Bitcoin guys in because they're always in that headspace.
Right.
So it's not hard to get them to go along with this, right?
Yeah.
And not saying that they're bad people, not saying that group of people are bad or they have their own
Well, they're my
motivations.
people. They're not bad, but I think they have it confused. But go ahead. Go ahead.
No, again,
And
like I said,
by the way, just for the record, I used to be that, but I'm no longer that. You're part of the reason, not the reason, but you're part of the reason. Right.
I used to be that guy.
Right. Right.
Okay, I know what this looks like. I know what it
Yep.
feels like. I know what being that guy
You
feels
don't
like. Looks
need
like.
gold to go up and the dollar to go down. They can go up together. In fact, they have.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yes,
what got me.
Yes.
They
And
have.
again,
Just look at data.
and Martin Armstrong told us that was going to happen 15 years ago.
Exactly.
Right.
That was it. It was you,
That was
Armstrong, and a couple friends.
and a couple
Me
and
you,
again
Armstrong.
and I'm downstream of Armstrong. I've just put a different spin on all of it by looking through the geopolitical
And you have to
lens
look through the geopolitical lens.
Sure.
That's the thing. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm
No,
interrupting.
no, you're good, Andy. It's all fine. So again, to finish the story, you have all these things happening, and then Warsh is able to survive um the Fed meeting. Got 3 dissensions, right?
Right.
I noted what Jim Bianco said that a couple of days coming into the meeting, this could be bad for Warsh because he could get a lot of defections. Jim was completely correct to make that supposition. It didn't happen. Good on him. I'm glad Jim was wrong, to be honest with you, and I'm sure Jim was glad he was wrong because, who wants to have a Fed? Who wants to have a Fed dominated by these horrible people who were clearly put on the FOMC board to keep the Fed from reforming itself?
Right.
That's why they're there. That's
Exactly.
What everything I've been talking about for the last 4 years, going back to the insider trading scandal and coming into the Powell's second term confirmation, all of that stuff that happened during the early days of the Biden junta. That was all a setup for this moment to get those people on the FOMC that would be there to destroy, the next Fed chair who didn't play ball. Right? They have their plans, they have their plots, they know what they're doing. They're rational actors. I'm not, I give them agency. Well, I can give Warsh agency.
Sure.
And so you have to give Warsh some agency. So he survived that meeting. And then they looked at the state of the markets and went, okay, well, you guys, you didn't win this round. It's a push. If it's a boxing match, everybody, it was a push on points. They both got some blows in, and then we got to go to the next round. How's that, if you want to look at it that way? But it also meant that what you did in order to run that trade was to get the yen to break above the all-time high at 161.5, bust it out into the 163, 164 area, sell, right, and watch the long end of the curve selling off, like the Japanese 30-year and the 40-year and the 50-year. By the way, these are illiquid markets. It's just like Kalshi. You can move them for nothing. The 15-year, perfect example of that, by the way.
Think about that too.
Right.
You can move that around. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, same. Well, it's the same thing. You can't move the 10-year easily. You got to convince the market to move the 10-year for you, and you convince the market to move the 10-year by moving the 30-year and the 2-year.
Right.
Or the 3-year or the 5-year or some other relatively illiquid market. The 2-year is not illiquid. Don't misunderstand what I just said.
Right.
But the 3-year, maybe the 5, whatever.
Yeah, who buys that?
The Japanese 8-year, because the Japanese have 8-year. Like the British, they've got and the Swiss, they've got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 14, 17, 27, whatever. They've got them all. And who cares?
Yeah.
These things trade. There's 40 of them out. There's 40 HUSIPs out there representing $300 million. Well, you can move them around and, create a headline, which is the whole point. Yeah. It's about gaslighting.
Right.
And I've noticed over the last couple of years when I finally started to see this, when I started watching all this happening, I started watching the correlation of everybody going crazy about the bond markets and everybody quoting that the 30 years where the bad shit was happening. I'm like, why is nobody talking about the 10-year?
Right.
Why is everybody talking about the 30? Well, because the central banks can play out in the 30-year, in the illiquid 30-year space and move them a lot.
Makes a lot of sense. Yep. Let the market move the 10 by
manipulating. And then you watch the 30-year move, and maybe it moves up to 5. In the case it moves up to the next quarter point, and then the other central banks come in and buy it. Go, oh, I can get U.S. Treasuries at 5.25. I never thought I was going to be able to do that. And eventually, there's a limit to a lot of these shenanigans. And that's what I've been noticing is that the more I watch these things, the more I start to realize, oh, this is where the break points are. This is where the pain points are. This is where the limit of this policy can be. So when Bessent came in the other day, he went, oh, okay. They convinced everybody to go short the yen because the yen just broke out to the upside. So that means we now have short-termers, Momo monkeys. We got everybody on this trade. We don't just have the macro discretional guys. We don't just have the life insurance guys. We don't just have the central banks. We've got everyone on this trade, and everyone is short. Well,
Yes.
Isn't that where you can get the most bang for the buck if you break them?
Yes.
Because all you have to do is come in and go, oh, no, we're going to buy.
Exactly.
And then they're
Cover.
right, and they got to cover, and then we go from 164, 163, 164 on the yen to 156 in like 3 days, and you're like, and everybody's got whipsawed, and everybody's being taken out on a stretcher,
right?
Or you spend $40 billion to wipe out $400 billion worth of capital. Now, I don't have numbers. I'm just saying, but when you start talking in currency markets, folks, you're never working with anything less than like 10x leverage, from what I understand. I don't trade Forex. I'm an American. Hell, I'm not even allowed. But you're in there with 100. You're in there with 10, 20, 50, 100, 1,000x leverage in the currency markets. That's what you're trading in. Otherwise, there's not enough money to matter. Who's trading $1.13 versus $1.14 to make a penny?
Yeah.
No, you're betting it's going to move. You're going to make it a penny, so that you make $1,000 every time the euro moves a penny. You got to be levered up like 20,000x in order to get that to happen, right?
Right.
You put $11 on the table to make 20,000. It's good on you, but what leverage giveth on the way up takes away twice as fast on the way down.
Right.
So because you're levered up. Right. The trade moves against you. You're levered up 20 times. If the trade moves against you 5%, you're wiped out. You have no capital left.
Right.
So again, guys like Scott Bessent understand this. His Traders over at the U.S. Treasury Department understand it. Kevin Warsh understands it. Donald Trump certainly understands it. He's not stupid.
Right.
By the way, so does Andrew Bailey. So does Mark Carney. So does Kazuo Ueda. So do all their guys. And so everybody, so I keep saying over and over again, the real war is financial. The reason why the Iran war is important is because the Iran war is the enforcing on the ground the physical reality that the financial markets are built around and the financial flows are built around. That capital that it liquefies all this stuff, that 5% or 10% of capital that's the actual collateral, that's being taken off the table. Bessent is out there sanctioning everybody associated with the IRGC, including and not limited to, Russian banks or Chinese banks, but notice UAE banks and British banks and this bank and French banks and all these people who are doing business with the IRGC. So they're constantly knocking out vectors of liquidity for the IRGC and
That's
for Iran,
it, Tom.
And that's what you're saying. And it's just laying out over time. These are not things that are going to happen overnight. We're not going to get rid of the war in 21 days or this or that or anything else. Trump came in, blew up Iran, blew up the idea that Iran was this undefeatable, mountain nation of, crazy Persians, and just said, look, militarily, they're a paper tiger. We're taking them off the table. And we'll negotiate and escalate and bomb them and then negotiate and then renege and blah, blah. And we'll just keep doing the cycle over and over and over again until we keep uncovering the next layer of resistance to this strategy where they have to take assets, burn them, extend the conflict another 2 weeks.
And they got to buy U.S. oil.
Reset everything. Bomb them again, wait for the next, next layer of the, call it the mosaic strategy of the IRGC or whatever you want to, the next group of guys sticks their heads up, lobs a bunch of missiles, Trump bombs them in response, and we keep doing this. And every day the market gets the market, not just the market, but the investors around the world get the message. These guys are unreasonable. They're not interested in cutting a good deal for themselves and moving forward. They're here to burn the world to the ground, and we are going to reroute around them and take Hormuz off the table.
Yep.
And if you look at Donald Trump's strategy from a geopolitical perspective, it's very obvious that he cares about every maritime choke point on the planet. Where there's a leftover, where there's some carve out or leftover piece of the Spanish Empire, the British Empire, and I'm bringing up the Spanish, specifically about Gibraltar and all of North Africa. We all saw the images over the weekend of the guys running across the border in Ceuta, whatever that place is. But I looked at it this morning and somebody else, oh, by the way, the Spanish have 8 outposts along the North African border, which makes all of that Spanish sovereign waters in the Mediterranean. And these countries don't really even have, they have pockets of, the best pieces of the North African coast are still owned by the Spanish. And there's probably an agreement between them and the British and and the EU. And these are relationships and outposts that predate the European Union, World War II. These things go back hundreds of years.
Yeah.
But then you ask yourself the question, is that part of the reason why North Africa is the way it is?
Yeah, right? Yeah, right? Well, okay, so go back a little bit to Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. I didn't really I knew there was a dot, or there was dots to the Ankara trade. I think that's huge, but then it works really well blowing up them financially.
But you blow up the collateral. So think about how much money they were making. I've been saying this since the beginning of the war.
Yeah.
Think about how much money City of London and their subsidiaries and, their P&I clubs, their banks, all of this stuff. Think about how much money they make on trading off the volatility of being able to dial up, dial down the chaos around the Middle East at any moment in time.
Yeah.
And someone, and in this case, I mean Donald Trump, is very clearly trying to blow all that up, literally and figuratively. And he's got Bessent working the financial side of the thing. And what I think, and what I've noticed, is that the closer we get to the midterms, the more histrionic everything gets, right? Makes sense. It's existential for everyone. And it's also, you're going to watch more extreme moves being made. And you're going to watch them, I think, you're going to watch people burning assets left and right in order to try and stay alive and stay in the game for as long as possible. Look, when you're short stacked, again, I'll use another metaphor for you. When you're short stacked at the poker table and the big blind's coming around and you only got 6 big blinds left, and you're looking at that ace jack offsuit and you're in 5th position in an 8-person table and you're 3 off the dealer button, do you call to stay in the hand and hope to see a flop? What do you do? Probably. Well, I guess you almost have to. If you had a stack that was 5 times the size, and you know that the best player at the table is on the dealer button in that position, you would probably just throw ace jack offsuit away. Yep. But in this case, if it was suited, you might play it, and throw it on the table. But when you're short stacked, you don't really have an option. At some point, you don't actually bet there. You don't actually call there. You actually raise in order to get the people behind you off the pot so you can steal the big blinds or see a flop and actually maybe get a halfway decent hand out of it. That's the kind of, so what we're watching
That's
now
a good analogy, actually.
Yeah, we're watching this as we go through this. You're just watching, people's behavior become more and more
extreme,
urgent. I think urgent is the better word.
A good word.
Yeah, I think urgent's the better word. So
I think so too. So and it's interesting. It's like not only are you eliminating these, you're controlling these choke points and taking them off the table. Now I don't know if the irony is the right word, but all the Euros got to buy U.S. assets.
And then Trump is also, turning up the price of oil one week and turning it down the next week, and then they're having to buy our LNG, or they're having to buy Russian LNG or Russian oil, refined by the Indians, and then they got to pay the extra premium, and everybody's like, and what's happening? And then we can have Bessent then turn around and dial down the euro, like. If you look sincerely, I've been screaming about this for 4 years now, that Lagarde's been running a yield curve control program against the tightening interest rate screws that the United States implemented and didn't move into out of necessity because they didn't have any other options. No. Powell did this for explicitly the reasons I have stated. It's almost obvious at this point.
Yeah.
Now, once he was done, he's now I think he set up nicely a guy like Warsh to come in. So then you have to ask yourself the question, was that always the plan? Because you don't do SOFR, you don't do the things that happened during the Biden hunt, the raising of the interest rates as high as they did. You don't execute certain, crypto banks where there was like where there was obvious money laundering, like Silvergate and all the rest of them. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't make all of these moves. You don't screw the Europeans out of Credit Suisse like he did, right? You don't, and blow up all those AT1 cocoa bonds. I'm going back to something from, 23. Which then invalidated the idea of those conditionally convertible bonds as a means by which to attack and take over other companies and whatnot. The United States put their foot down and said, "Look, that's enough. You're not taking Credit Suisse and UBS because they're an incredibly important part of our ability to regulate dollar markets in Europe."
Yeah.
Let's not forget the fact that UBS is one of the four major banks over at the LBMA, for the gold guys in the audience, as Vince Lanci reminded me of over the last week when I was on with him and Matt Dines. By the way, if you have not talked to Matt Dines, you should. That guy's
I would love
phenomenal.
to.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk to Vince too.
Well, if you don't know Vince,
I don't know Vince.
okay.
Put me in touch.
I'll be happy to put you in touch.
Make
with
that
those guys.
happen.
Oh,
I'm an
absolutely.
admirer. I'm an admirer.
They're very good guys. They're very good guys.
So go back. Let's say go back a month ago or 6 weeks ago.
Okay.
With Starmer, go back to Starmer, and
this is funny, right? Because I think it's pretty obvious that Trump executed Keir Starmer.
Yeah, right.
And he walked into the G7 meeting and went, "I'm in charge," and then he handed him a folder, and 2 days later he was resigning.
He was gone.
But
and I talked. Who did I talk to? I was like, I bet she's going to resign. There's like, no way. And then that happened. But what's fascinating to me, it's like, it's a domino effect, but it's not. And what I mean by that, you got a bunch of heads not on the platter yet, but they're in the guillotine. And it's just like, okay, got one. Okay.
Who's next? Macron?
Who's next? You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. No, Sanchez is clearly next in Europe. Okay. Because Trump wants access to Gibraltar.
Okay.
He wants access. He wants permanent access through Morocco to Gibraltar.
That's what this is about.
Yes. It's also about opening up.
I just got chills, man.
It's also about
I love you, Tom. I love you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Andy. And I always appreciate the opportunity to chat.
No, but you're right.
Okay. Well, maybe not. I'm just
maybe not. But that's what's fascinating to me. Who's next? Okay, you're in the guillotine. I'm going to pull.
Yeah, let's pull them down. But let's talk about this, because like Susan Kokinda was almost pressured.
Tom, it makes sense. That's
a couple of weeks ago. She's talking about the big road through Morocco, the Donald J. Trump highway that connects the Moroccan coast with the Sahel region of Africa. They're trying to open up Africa. So of course, 2 weeks later, Morocco, and then there's all these other things. And then what did we watch? We watched other people try to spin it, and specifically speaking about people like Thomas Massey and others trying to spin it that Trump was behind it all. He may have been, or Morocco may have just decided that, at this point, they've got enough of a backstop from the United States to make a big move against Spain, because it's always been a problem, and they want to put the screws to Algeria as well, because that's French. Either French or obviously it's French, but I mean, yeah. So like, there's a lot of things going on here, and maybe just the African people, the North African, states, maybe they're tired of being, colonial playgrounds for the old sclerotic colonial powers of Europe. And this is just the natural moment where, hey, the boot's been lifted off their neck just enough that they can make a move. Why does not everything on this planet has to be the 14D chess move of Donald Trump? It could just be that Donald Trump is the bull in the China shop that says, you know what? All this stuff's fake. None of this is real China. I'm killing it all. I'm knocking this thing down. I'm buying the friggin' store, and I'm going to gild plate the entire thing.
You're right.
Okay. Whatever, Don. Thank you. And then everybody's like, yes, finally, somebody decided to stop playing somebody else's game.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be more complicated than that, folks. The moves themselves are complicated, but at the end of the day, look at what's happening, and then, make some decisions. And if you see, again, it's like everything else. Like, everybody gets focused on what happens at the operational or the tactical level, right? I think it's the tactical level, and then we move up to what was the operational plan, and the tactics are how but nobody's ever asked to look at the strategic level. The minute you start looking strategically at things, the bots come out of everywhere and say, "Oh, you're playing 47D chess," and how about it's like basic freaking strategy?
Okay, so what you just said did it for me, because because again, I have disagreements with the tactics at
Of
times,
course,
right?
we all
Of
do.
course. And thanks for giving me grace. But you got to look at the high level because then it makes sense. And then you're like, I find myself, in agreement, really, because I'm an American.
Look,
And
like Andy,
does that make sense?
the thing is, it's like everything else. We can have a philosophical discussion about whether the war is moral or not, or we can realize that some wars are that Christian just war theory is operative, and sometimes we just have to do what needs to be done.
Yeah.
And it's not, again, we'd all love to be able to, eat our principles, but we can't.
Yeah.
Like, and this is where I finally had to make a choice at some point to say, look, I you know, do I want to see people die in bombings? Of course not. Do I want to see the
Sure.
Iranian people
Right.
have it to be continually stepped on by the United States because the IRGC won't get out of the way?
Right.
That's the way I read it. You can read it differently if you want. I don't care. But, the end of the day, I don't want to see the Balkans being torn apart by the Europeans and the British. I don't want to see North Africa under the thumb of the mix of the Spanish and the British and the French. I'm tired of that. I'm tired of the Turks running roughshod over everybody in the Eastern Mediterranean. I'm tired of the Russians playing games in the stands. I'm tired of the Chinese playing games everywhere else. I'm like tired of all of it. And I'm tired of the Americans doing terrible things in around Central and South America and everywhere else. If the question you have to ask yourself, or the thing you have to to make your peace with, is that sometimes the conflict, which we're all would rather be, conflict avoidant, can we give peace a chance? Yeah, we have given peace a chance, but it didn't work.
Yeah.
Because so maybe, just maybe, sometimes you got to fight a war to finish to actually make things change, because no one is going to give up what they're no the Europeans aren't going to give up their grift of stealing everybody's wealth through currency arbitrage and bond arbitrage without a fight.
Yeah.
They're not going to do it.
Right.
I got 1,000 years of history that tells me that they're not going to do it. Like,
No.
at some point, you kind of have to just go, you know what? No. And if they have fellow travelers, whatever you want to call allies, fellow travelers, satraps, quislings, I don't care. Pick a name. Go up the stack as far as you want to go. Then they're going to act as rational actors in their best interest, and you're going to poke them in order to get to them.
Yeah.
I'm going to poke Iran to get to London and to get to France. When I look at the bond spreads, it's pretty obvious that every time Trump bombs Iran again, the French 10 years flip out, and Lagarde has to scramble behind the scenes to keep the French 10 years from blowing out. Same thing with the UK, by the way.
Yeah.
While they're trying to manage the yen carry trade and manage our 30-year mortgage market through manipulating our 210 spread and the 10-year 30-year fixed rate mortgage spread, which we're not in control of anymore because Fannie and Freddie are still in conservatorship. Like, all these things are connected to each other.
Yeah. You have to understand that.
These systems were built up over 100 or 150 or 200 years. Some of them are built on top of each other. It started here with the Federal Reserve in 13, and then we had the Great Depression, and then we had Bretton Woods, and then we had Fannie and Freddie, and then we had this, and then the 2008 financial crisis, and now someone is trying to hold the world they created after 2008 in abeyance. And someone was making money off of all that, and it wasn't the United States.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And it wasn't us. Let's land the plane on this.
Mm-hmm.
We got a very important election coming up, and we talked about polling and propaganda, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe it. I think Trump's gonna go away. Yeah, I mean, I think the Republicans are gonna more than hold.
Yeah, so do I. The redistricting alone turned it into a coin flip.
Yeah.
Right? The +8 or whatever it was in redistricting is a coin flip. I think somebody is making the argument. I don't remember who. You read a lot during the week. I read all sorts of people, and I retain what I can, and I filter it all back here, and so forgive me if I don't get the attribution, folks, but I'm someone was making the argument over the weekend that Trump's executive order to the post office is more important actually than the Save Act, because that's going to shut down the mail-in, a lot of the mail-in
totally
ballot
100%.
collections.
100%.
And the Supreme Court has already validated that strategy.
And that was genius, by the way.
It was genius.
It was genius.
So give the man some credit and understand that maybe the reason why somebody's out there screaming about Donald Trump being a terrible person is because their ox is being gored.
Yeah.
That maybe they have bigger long-term plans. It's pretty obvious that the Panikins of Podcastistan, that would be the Tucker Carlsons and the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Thomas Masseys and all the rest of them, along with Steve Bannon and his crew, they all started measuring the drapes, to quote Dexter White, for 2028, thinking that the midterms were done, and now they're measuring the drapes of how they're going to get in 2028 and restore the status quo that was existent before Donald Trump ever existed, or it was before Donald Trump, came down the elevator or won 2 different elections or whatever. And I think they made a bad bet.
I think you're right. I
just think every day they look more and more irrelevant and histrionic. I see, again, I have, what I see from them is just kind of hilarious and sad, but that's just me. I think that most people are not on Twitter. I think the bigger threat to Donald Trump has nothing to do with anything you and I talked about today. I think it has more to do with MAHA than it does anything else, because the soccer mom set that voted for Trump in 2024, they voted for Trump in order to clean up the food, clean up the vaccines, to clean up this, to clean up this, to clean up that. And RFK Jr. at HHS has been stymied every step of the way. There's well-documented infighting between him and Dr. Oz, and I believe that Susie Wiles is involved in that as well. Like, there's a lot of GOP establishment that thinks that, it's smart. And it's smart. If you want to restore the status quo, you get the one group of voters who are easily swayed by the most emotional arguments imaginable.
Sure.
Angry with
just
them.
To our kids. You're not going to let our kids have this. Yeah.
Right. I mean, again, we still all have PTSD from COVID and this and that and everything else. And again, that's not a judgment statement. Right. That's not a judgment statement. You should have PTSD. You should be angry about COVID. You should be angry about the vaccines and the this and the that and all that. You should be. I get it about the food quality and all of that. I'm in complete agreement. So, but if I'm going to sit here and put on my MAGA hat while I do my James Carville impression, which I think is hilarious that he's crashing out, by the way. Right. Pure political animal, pure political strategist hat. I'm like, yeah, that was a good move. Well, how are we gonna counter that?
Well, here's one for you then. Do you think this whole Fauci getting in front of testifying and Rand Paul going after him, that has to do with the election, right?
Of course it does. And my worry is that, I have a couple of things. I've been up and down on Rand Paul since 2021, since Trump lost. I think my opinion on Rand Paul is very complicated, and I've been watching him carefully. I think that, like Amy Coney Barrett, he got beat up, nearly killed. Someone sent a message.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's that. There's one. 2, Rand is in many ways a doctrinaire libertarian, but he was okay with certain aspects of aggressive foreign policy under Obama. But all of a sudden, Trump going after, drug runners in international waters was somehow beyond the pale and an act of war. Give me a break. But then, somewhere around 6 to 8 weeks ago, Rand Paul turned a corner. So did somebody finally secure Rand Paul's future? Did his family safety? Did he get the tap on the shoulder? Say, it's okay. We've taken care of it because he's been good, but at the same time, recently, but at the same time, the entire thing with Dr. Fauci could easily be spun as a yet another demoralization campaign because you put this man up there, he takes the fifth 111 times against the law, and he's not clapped in irons immediately.
Yeah.
Which is, again, if your goal is to further demoralize people by saying, see, look, the system doesn't work.
Yeah.
Then I'm in my X-Files mode. I want to believe.
I think what you said has a lot of truth with Rand. How do I say this? I'm a fan, but I'm not a raging fan. But I am a fan. I think it has to do with him, but also a lot of people. I think a lot of what they say is covering themselves.
And look,
at the end of the day, they're going to play ball.
Again, at the end of the day, Harry Reid shows up to Congress, the Senate one day with a big black eye. Then Mitch McConnell gets thrown down the stairs, and then this one gets thrown, and then John Roberts gets thrown down. I mean, everybody gets thrown down the stairs at some point.
Yeah.
I mean, I like to talk about the manila envelope quotient, right?
Yeah.
Who controls the stack of manila envelopes? Right, here you go.
You're going to vote now. You're going to vote.
Yeah, this is your vote, the manila envelope quotient. Someone's MEQ,
yeah.
And then on the other side, there's the baseball bat quotient.
Right.
Whack, or the thrown down the stairs quotient. Like, how many stairs are we going to throw you down today? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and look, I think they threw Fetterman down the stairs, and they turned around and got even more base. I'm like.
It worked
again, and I say, frankly, no. What I mean is, no. The opposite. They threw him down the stairs for beginning the turn, and he said, "I don't care. I'm still doing this because John Fetterman is in Luongoism ungovernable."
Yeah.
Right. Maybe I don't know.
Right.
Like, guys, I'm like, we don't have good information. We only have the reflections of good information, and we have to. Again, one of the things that, I know is a criticism of what I do is that Luongo never brings receipts. Well, yeah, sometimes I'm also talking about things that are just quite too complicated for me to like put up charts and show you what I'm talking about, because that's what I get paid for, folks. That's what I do with my paid patrons. I show them that stuff. Okay.
Well,
and then
you've shown receipts to me. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, fair. But again, the criticisms sometimes are very valid. Okay. And credit to you, you kept me like on path today, which is good. So, but at the same time, sometimes the best the information you're going to get is, I got this data point, I got that 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 data point, and then you do the Venn diagram, and they all point to one thing, but that thing is the thing you can't see and you're not allowed to talk about. And in my experience, it used to be, at one point in the past, it was quote unquote Israel. We weren't allowed to talk about Israel because if we talked about Israel, we got banned from the internet. Okay. Well, today you talk about London and the bots come out of everywhere.
Yeah.
You get siloed. You're not allowed to talk to other people. No one wants to talk to you anymore because they're getting the time. Whatever happens, like, it's too hot. A lot of it is too hot for people. And look, that's my gig. I bring it up because I think it's an important story that is undercovered. Sometimes I overcover it.
I think it's a true story, Tom.
I don't know if it's true, but it's at least partially true.
I think it's true. I'm on board with that on the record. I think it's true. And I think it needs to be talked.
Well, again,
I'm on that train.
Fair. And I'm good, but at the same time.
And that's not to patronize you either or appease you. That's I'm on that train.
Of course not. I mean, if you thought I was shit, you tell me, and I'd be okay with that, because we've had those conversations. But my point being, and what I'm trying to do here is to say, look, I present a lot of this information like this in order for you to assess it. Like, I understand that, I probably glossed over. I mean, for your audience, obviously I can get geekier than I normally do, but on, a more normal, a more kind of normie channel, like people don't understand what a carry trade is like at all. And I get that, but sometimes, you drop something in the thing, take some notes, go to Investopedia and read about it.
Yeah.
Like, for example, here's another good one, right? Everybody was screaming about the Strategic Petroleum Reserve draws last week, 2 weeks ago.
I'm looking at your Twitter feed right now.
Right. And I said, well, and the funny thing is that I only brought that up in the Twitter feed after I did an entire podcast with Vince Lanci where we went over the mechanics of what was going on. And Trump did not sell that oil. He just took a repo on it. Here, I'll give you 100 million barrels a day, and you're going to give me 105 million barrels next year. And the inventory has to drop because the oil's been removed. And yes, there's a limit to that trade. He can only do so many of those barrels. But given the fact that over the course of this time, a lot of Hormuz traffic and a lot of Hormuz flows have been rerouted, the effect of that stopgap measure was two things. One, profitable for the United States.
And very effective.
And two, effective. Yeah. And what are you grousing about? That your opponent got one over on you?
Right.
Sorry, folks. Like, it happens.
Yeah.
I'm won that
looking
hand.
at the letter on my other computer screen here on your Twitter feed.
Well, I mean, and that's a very important point, which is that Trump repoed a bunch of oil. And he's going to get paid back in spades.
Yeah.
And maybe he even gets paid back in the kind of oil that we actually want. Maybe he traded a whole bunch of light sweet fracking crude for a whole bunch of heavy sour crude that we can turn into friggin' diesel fuel. That would be hilarious, by the way. Which is worth more than the light sweet stuff is.
Right. Interesting.
In this market, because the world is short diesel refinery.
Diesel.
Yeah.
It's like
diesel
Canada, right?
Yeah. So like I don't know. Ultimately, I don't know where we're going to go. Obviously, the elections are the big story that's out there. I think we get to these moments where they're like singularities. We can't see past them. But Trump's not acting like he's going to lose. But, that doesn't mean anything. He could still lose.
Sure.
Sure.
I just don't think he will.
Is it the end of the world if he does? Here's a
That's a good question. I'd almost say yeah.
Well, everybody, but that's the natural response to that. It's like, well, if they blow up the yen carry trade, then the world is going to end. And yet we've blown up a lot of the yen carry trade.
Right.
The world didn't end.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, sometimes it's just gaslighting, folks.
Yep.
Yeah,
we'll see.
There are bigger things at play than we can perceive sometimes. And the best thing to do is not get lost in tactics. But think about the strategy, and then realize
about the strategy,
and realize that sometimes, you're fighting a 13 front war, both financial and physical and political and everything else. And sometimes, and every day, the battlefield shifts a little bit and it looks chaotic, and it is. But when you understand that it's all in service of a particular outcome, then it's just shifting the battlefield. You're just shifting your focus to where the enemy is weak or where the enemy is giving you an opportunity to attack. It's more that than it is anything else. Oh, well, we've attacked along this vector and now we're stymied this far. All right, well, let's put that on the back burner. Let's go over here and let's go deal with that. And it looks chaotic.
Yeah.
And of course, your opponents are going to propagandize and they're going to play their game and say, see, we won that battle and now we're winning this battle. Well, no, you backed up this far and stopped. And now we're moving over here and we're going to back you up over here. And then when we get back to you over here, we're going to back you up another 4 steps. We didn't, and it's just a game of, it's just a war of attrition against a very,
it's a war of attrition.
Oh, it's a very, very powerful and deep enemy that's hundreds of years old.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have a head. It just doesn't. It's a big multi-headed hydra.
Yeah, you gotta go for the
dare
heart.
I say, call it a specter. And we move on from there.
Yeah. Tom, so tell me about your Patreon if people want to follow you and get more of this, more of you. And I have a saying, I want more of Tom, not less. So how do they do that? And I'm a supporter.
I do appreciate that, Andy.
No
Patreon/Gold Goats and Guns. We have 2 tiers. Basically a twice weekly private podcast, slideshow, market report, what I call a market report, and a private discussion server, and any private blog posts or little bits and bobs that they give to people. And then we have the $12 a month newsletter, and we do a full portfolio, bespoke writing with both myself and Dexter White. We have a podcast that's publicly available. You can find it anywhere. The Gold Ghosts and Guns podcast. I'm on Twitter at TFL1728. Check it out.
Yeah, we'll link to all of it. Colby will grab all of it. We'll put it in the show notes on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. And Andy Schechtman gave you a lot of props. I couldn't agree more. You guys, all my viewers and listeners, it's probably the best value. Tom, you got to check out his podcast. It's for free. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tom. But
podcast is just
it's probably the best podcast out there if you want more of this. And then please consider following and supporting Tom and his work. Tom,
we appreciate it.
You bet.
Yeah, give Andy my best. I haven't talked to him since we got together in May. Actually, I've been meaning to actually reach out to him. I just keep
reach out to him. He's in the weeds. I saw him in Florida. I was in South Florida a couple weeks ago, and I saw him there and hung out a little bit with him. But he's in the weeds, as I have been. That's why. I shot you an email. It's just
we're all busy.
We're busy. But you're one of the guys I keep a tab on. I need to get in touch with Craner. I shot him an email. I haven't heard from him.
Alex has been. Alex was. Again, I hear this stuff third hand. That I haven't actually talked to Alex in a while either. Apparently, it's the summer. He was on vacation, getting a much needed rest, and getting invites to other podcasts and whatnot. So good for him.
He's a busy guy.
As always, good for them. I always want to see people, do well.
He's a friend. But I'd love to talk to Lacey, man. If I'll shoot you an email if we can hook that up. I would love that.
Vince Lanci? Absolutely.
Yes, I would love that.
Okay, no problem. Vince will be happy to come on. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. You guys can talk gold and the COMEX and all that stuff. It'd be great.
All right, Andy. Take care, brother.
Yep. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.